Yes, kia ora, Morena, welcome. Um, it's great to follow on from John because Auckland University are one of the key providers of environmental resource management expertise when we make decisions about um, geothermal plants and steam fields in New Zealand. Um, this is a photo here of the newly developed Tauhara geothermal field and the Wairaki Tauhara geothermal system, 174 megawatts brought online by Contact Energy last year. So just a little bit about my background. I have my own consulting company, Daysh Limited. We're a specialist environmental resource management company. We deal with people and the environment. So quite a different talk to all of the technical discussions, but our resources in terms of doing this work are the scientists and engineers that need to bring information for good decision making. I've developed resource consents and environmental studies for over 100 power plants around the world in the last 40 years, including 20 geothermal power schemes in Asia and New Zealand. One of the other things I do is I'm a certified decision maker by the New Zealand government. So when a project comes forward for environmental permitting, I often chair panels of experts to make decisions about the geothermal project going forward in terms of environmental effects, conditions on the development, and the key measurement and monitoring regime that is required to have a good geothermal system, particularly those like Tauhara that are right near an urban area. So Tauhara's sort of only a few kilometres away from Taupo, so many issues. I was a past president of the New Zealand Geothermal Association for about 5 or 6 years, a few years ago. Now look, environmental laws and processes. These are the lens through which effects on people and the environment are considered. Geothermal is complicated. It is not an easy technology to either develop or to consent. It interfaces with people and the environment at every level, subsurface, on the land, in the air. Environmental and law processes govern the use of our natural and physical resources, and most jurisdictions around the world require an EIA, environmental assessment, to underpin an approval process to set the ground rules for how developments, including geothermal, can go forward with certainty on looking after people and the environment. I learned a fascinating thing just yesterday, that in Taiwan, if you have a power plant up to 50 megawatts, you don't need to do an EIA. I think for development and pace, that may be a good thing, but I have worries about that. And particularly because the interface with things like groundwater and heavy metals and H2S controls, those sort of things, the monitoring and measurements and safeguards that need to be put into an approval process are absolutely critical. You cannot develop geothermal. When I first started geothermal in 1985 in New Zealand, Wairaki was pouring all of its geothermal reinjection water into the river. It was using river cooling, and mercury was just pouring into the river from the geothermal system. So I certainly find that a bit outstanding. You know, it's not quite unbelievable, but certainly an interesting fact in Taiwan. Now, in terms of the main environmental issues that we're used to in terms of this technical area, we're looking at reservoir sustainability. So how do you develop a reservoir sustainably is fundamental to decision making in New Zealand. You can come along and put a whole lot of wells in, have a field that's not big enough for your power plant, and it's gone in 10 years. So in New Zealand, through the modelling and the geoscience, we have to approve a long sustainable use, which is important for investment, but also for sustainability. Surface geothermal features are a big issue. This is Pahutu geyser, subsidence, particularly near townships. If you take the pressure down in reservoirs, your land starts subsiding and houses start tilting. So big area. Hydrothermal eruptions we need to care about. Induced seismicity, certainly in terms of any fracking which goes on. That's a big issue for communities. They're worried about the safety of their homes with these sort of developments. Effects on groundwater. A lot of issues with that, particularly when communities are using groundwater for drinking supplies and for those sort of things. Now look, in New Zealand, we've had a two-stage process for managing our natural resources. The first stage was in 1991, when the government brought forward a Resource Management Act. It combined 20 major statutes into one-stop shop. In New Zealand legislation, Maori, our Indigenous people, have a special recognition. They must be consulted with and they must be given special recognition. In terms of local implementation, we have, I think, 12 regional councils. Each of these regions have their own policies and development rules, and the two main ones for our geothermal system are Bay of Plenty and Waikato, where 95% of our geothermal development is. So a lot of work working alongside local authorities in both policy development, setting the scene, and in terms of resource consents, which they administer. One of the things that has occurred lately is that some very large projects in New Zealand, renewable energy projects, have been caught out because there's other legislation outside the RMA which has been required, things like approvals under the Conservation Act, where you're working in national parks, things like this. So while the project has merit and has all its resource consents, it can be tripped up in the courts by other appeals and things made by parties that don't want the project to occur. So what the government did in December 2024, this is a brand new piece of legislation. It's called the Fast Track Approvals Act. It's a one-stop shop regime. So yesterday people were talking about needing to deal maybe with 20 government or 10 government agencies for geothermal permitting, lots of different permits. The New Zealand government has decided we can't wait for that. We've got infrastructure, not only geothermal, that we have to get on with and get going and stop the cycle of quite often small pressure groups opposing developments and taking them through the courts for years and years and years and years and nothing ever happening. So our government in New Zealand has responded with the Fast Track Approvals Project. It's a centralised decision-making process. It bypasses standard consenting processes and red tape, enabling these projects to be processed in a really timely and cost-effective way. It addresses all the approvals that are required for a project in one simple process. In terms of conservation land, your national parks, developers have to do a land swap. So if you're affecting a national park by cutting trees down or building roads, the requirement is for the developer or the owner or the government agency to find another area that's not national park, add it to the national park and do a land swap. It's very effective. I've done this a number of times for hydro projects, things like this as well. You have to be a project of national significance or regional significance to obtain access to this approvals process. And it speeds up the approval process, but you have to maintain high standards of environmental management and account for Indigenous rights. So just these are the two purposes of the two acts. This one here, RMA, so we've got a long purpose. We've got to promote sustainable management. We've got to look after a whole lot of things. If you get into the fast track project, and we have 150 projects currently going through in New Zealand, there is only one purpose: to facilitate the delivery of infrastructure and development projects with significant benefits. And as a decision maker, I make decisions under this new Fast Track Approvals Act. It's very clear: get on with the job. We've got to go. We've got to go, otherwise the world's going to be in big trouble with climate change. Just quickly about Tauhara. This is an example of another fast track process we did a while ago, and this was under a previous fast track process, which again was very fast, because we started consenting Tauhara in February 2010. We've done about a year and a half of work with all of the New Zealand experts. GNS Science did the geoscience information, Auckland University, actually John's father, Mike, ran all the reservoir modelling. We had Jacobs doing the engineering. We had top ecologists. We had top air quality specialists. And we had this incredibly strong package of information and expert evidence in New Zealand, and I think everywhere in Taiwan. The way that the technical people provide and make a difference to fast tracking and getting on with the job is they provide their expert evidence to a decision maker like me. And I'll listen to the expert, and they give us advice like, what is the sustainability of the field? What are the areas of margin? So the involvement of experts, science and engineering, is absolutely critical. So to get into this fast track process, you've got to do your homework with the expert teams. We had a decision by the end of 2010 through that previous process, and the new Fast Track Act will be even quicker. Now, just in terms of consenting and what we had to prepare for Tauhara, was we had to identify, this is 15, 20 square kilometres, the project. I don't know whether I've got a pointer here. Oh, here we go. Mount Tauhara in the middle, so the project wraps right around the base of a big, or a large ex-volcano, Mount Tauhara. The town is right here, and managing the effects between developing a large geothermal project right near a town needs a lot of thought and a lot of good management and a good mitigation process as well. So just to summarise, this was Mount Tauhara, the project site for the Tauhara Geothermal Project pre-development. It's a sacred mountain for the Maori people. There are so many stories about this mountain, and the power project is now built on the flanks of the mountain. And one of the things that got this underway was in 2008 or 9, Contact Energy decided to drill a well in a new part of the Tauhara geothermal system. It came in, it was TH11 or TH12, it was a bonanza well, and it gave the company confidence to go ahead and do all this incredible sort of planning type of work. That mountain, I think, in terms of your volcano here, is of the same type of status. The amazing thing that Contact Energy did was, with my assistance, there were about 12 Indigenous people organisations all around this sacred mountain. We made agreements with each and every one of those, and before we went for our decision making, those agreements, which included a whole lot of mitigation packages, employment opportunities, and in some cases bringing Maori land into the steam field so they could actually get economic benefits from their own land, underpinned a very fast and a very successful process. I can't underestimate the importance of developers working in true partnership with local communities and Indigenous people, because in my experience, both in New Zealand and around the world, Indigenous peoples have a right to be involved. In New Zealand, a lot of the geothermal systems are on Maori-owned land. You heard probably from Richard Adams, MB Century. They're owned by Tuarapaki Trust, who are a Maori land-owning organisation that 20 years ago developed their own geothermal project themselves at Mokai. They built their own geothermal power plant. They supply direct use heat to greenhouses. They built their own dairy factory, and all the process heat comes from their own geothermal power plant. That empowers the Indigenous people. I'm working with another company called Tahiki 8C. We've just consented a 50 megawatt power station on their land, and they manage it, they control it, they're on the board of directors. They're not just bit part players in the project, they're actually at the heart of owning their own systems. So I'd love to see that in Taiwan as well. But that's my presentation. I see I've got 3 minutes to go, so any questions I'll be happy to take.
Is there any questions? We have 3 minutes. And Daysh gave a very strong suggestion to our EIAs. and I think that the fast track is also that we will first consider. We were in the same stage, yeah, same consideration, yeah. So is there any, yeah, please.
So for now, just the monitoring plan is required when you trying to get permission or when you trying to get license in
Yes. So when you submit your application for a fast track, you have to have all your management plans and monitoring plans prepared and in detail, saying exactly where, what you're going to monitor, what the techniques are. So that has to be all prepared. And when a developer comes to me as a chair of a decision-making panel, I have to make sure that those are all in place. I impose conditions to make sure they are implemented, and there's reporting back on all of those things regularly. The other thing in New Zealand is, because under the RMA, the Resource Management Act, liability is strict. We have strict liability. So if a company does an offence against the environment, for example, it pours reinjection water into a local stream, affects the groundwater, it's not the company that's prosecuted, it's the manager that's prosecuted and the director of the company that's prosecuted. So that strict liability means that the environment and the community effects and all those sort of issues are very personal to those that are responsible. So that's another very strong technique that means companies act the way they should in terms of environment and effects on communities.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Daysh. Yeah. Then welcome the next speaker.